The Yeti kit starts off with parts bag A, which contains lots of beefy parts, some diff oil because we'll be constructing the front diffs, diff cups, differential parts, and a lot of other parts are in plastic bag 1. Got really beefy bearings here that I'm going to immediately get in some oil so they can start soaking before I use them. Just a personal thing I do. Big, super strong, heavy duty drive shafts for the front axle. A couple of large screws, some shims. All of this is in bag A. You also have grease. I won't be using Axial grease or diff fluid. I'll be using my own. I won't be sticking with the standards on this kit. I'll be changing it up just a little bit. Kind of trying to stick with the way the manual tells me to put it together, but I'll be changing it up just a bit with the oils and fluids that I'm using. But anyway, that's bag A. So the first thing in the Yeti XL kit is to build the front differential just like the little one. So that's what we're going to do. Some of the parts are here. I'll separate out what I need along with the parts in plastic bag 1 and start building that front differential.
Team Baxter.
I've got the diff parts together here. Pretty much a standard diff procedure. You've got your large ring gear there, a couple of spider gears, a couple of more spider gears for the inside that go on a kind of a cross pin, a couple shims to go along with all this, O-rings to kind of seal it all up. This diff cup does get filled. The manual recommends that you put 20,000 weight oil in there. I will not be doing that. I'm putting 500,000 weight oil in the front. Personal preference, something I'm doing. Do what you feel free to do, but I'll be using 500,000 in there. Give me a little tougher diff action, a little more aggressive vehicle. So anyway, I assemble the spider gears onto this shaft that gets dropped into the diff cup. Diff cup gets filled with diff oil. A couple output cups go on there to link up with the shafts later. And as I said, pretty standard diff build going on here. Everything is here except for the bearings that I have soaking in light oil. Can barely see the oil, but those will stay in the oil and I use those as needed. Just a personal thing I do, not really required. I'm gonna get half of it assembled, get the diff cup filled, and then I'll come back right before I close it all up. I'm assembling the large gear. I'd like to put a little bit of grease underneath that silicone O-ring before I put it in. This grease will largely come out when I install this O-ring, but I like to put it in there anyway. I'll push that O-ring right down on there. You can see it's coming out right there, but then I run a little bit more around it. And in this case, they ask for a little washer before you put the pin in. So I'll slide that washer over there, and that'll kind of trap that grease in and help keep that O-ring seated a little bit. See that washer on there. And then they ask for this pin. A little tricky. Pin has to slide down in that hole. Kind of lay it in there. Use my tweezers to kind of get it lined up right and push it right down in the hole. So there's a pin in there above the washer, and then the large spider gear slides right over that. That's the top section. So the diff cup gets a bearing, and then the little output drive cup goes in there. Flip that over, and in goes another silicone washer. And just like I did on the other side, I'm going to run a little bit of grease under that before I trap that washer in there. See that layer of grease I put down in there. Run the washer over the shaft. A little more difficult now that you're working inside this diff cup, so I use a pair of tweezers to help things along. See that washer pushing down all that grease. Completely not necessary, just something I do. Little metal washer goes on top of this. Push that down to make sure it gets seated well. And there's a hole in the side of the diff cup, and that's how you get your pin in real nice and easy. So you turn that shaft so that the hole is kind of facing that hole on the outside, and slide that pin in there. On the side, I'm going to use these same tweezers to kind of try to push it through, but you can see it right there in the top. So what we're doing is looking for the entry point. I believe it's right there. Turn that around. You can see me slide that pin in there when it hits the right point. So I got it lined up in there. You can see the pin sliding right in there. Push that pin on through. So that it's hanging out both sides. It is freely moving, and I'm going to drop this large spider gear in there. Make sure it's seated down on that shaft. You can see the top of the shaft sits flush with the top of the spider gear. It's moving in there just fine. Last thing is to make sure that that hole gets closed up with the provided set screw. We'll be taking a 2mm driver, inserting that set screw right there in that side hole to kind of close it up a little bit. I'll be running 500,000 weight oil halfway through this. So getting this 500,000 weight oil in there is kind of a task. Starting up high and just drawing it down, letting the stream kind of flow down. See it starting to come on the camera real heavy and thick and slow like. So that's a fat glob in there. We're going to let that seat, let that settle down. This oil is so thick that it's going to take a good couple minutes for that to sit down and get all down in the cracks and all. So I'm going to let that sit while I go ahead and build the spider gear. In just that little bit of time, the oil has settled enough so that I can feel comfortable dropping this little gear set that I built. This is just 4 tiny spider gears with washers on the back of each one. You can see a couple of the washers hanging there, shims. This gets dropped into this diff cup in the designated positions. Just get seated down in that oil, and then I'll go ahead and give this a little bit of time to sit down and kind of lay down into that oil. The oil's so thick it just takes a little bit for it to envelope the gears. So you can see it already starting to push up around the gears. Kind of help it along there. See it creeping up over the gears. So to go ahead and let that sit for a little bit and let the oil kind of run around it, and then I'll go ahead and top it off with more silicone oil before I close it up. It's been about 5 minutes and you can see that the oil has come up and covered the gears. Now what I'll do is go ahead and fill this almost all the way to the top. Leave just enough space for that when you install this top spider gear, when the oil pushes around, it doesn't come gushing all out of the top and make a big mess. There's a significant amount of space right there that has to push down into this diff cup when you install it. So fill this almost all the way to the top with whatever weight oil you chose. Let the air come out a little bit. Really doesn't matter so much on the air because there's going to be a little bit of air in there just due to the design the way this is and the fact that you're not filling it up all the way anyway. So that's also going to lighten the effect of the oil up a little bit as well. Anyway, get this almost all the way filled up. Get this on the top like so. Don't do it early or you'll drop your spider gear in there like I just did. And then we'll get these 4 screws in there, seal it up. Can't forget this small paper washer that goes in there. Not sure why, but it's in all the kits. It goes on every diff, pretty much every diff I've ever built. So it'll be going on this one as well. And that completes the front diff assembly.